Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. Thank you very much for joining this webinar on pathways to inclusive governance in Syria, balancing unity and diversity. Please let me briefly introduce myself. My name is Felix Knüppling, and I'm Vice President Programs at the Forum of Federations. Before we start, a short housekeeping note. The webinar will be run in both English and Arabic, and we have provided for simultaneous interpretation. So please choose the language of your choice. And further, after the presentation and the round of discussion with our Syrian colleagues, we'll also provide the opportunity for the audience to pose questions. So please use the Q&A function to ask questions or to provide comments. So let me briefly introduce to you the organization I'm representing and that has commissioned the report or the two reports that we'll be presenting today and then discuss. So the Forum of Federations is an international organization that is headquartered in Canada and was founded 25 years ago in a very critical moment of Canadian history, in a crisis the country had around questions around unity and diversity, when there was a very strong secessionist movement in one of Canada's units, the province of Quebec, which is predominantly French-speaking in contrast to the English-speaking rest of Canada. And the idea back then was, and still is today, of the organization is to inspire national debates on how to deal with issues around unity and diversity through sharing of international experiences on concepts such as multi-level governance, federalism, decentralization, and devolution, all concepts that essentially include elements of power sharing. We consider ourselves a think and do tank, so to say, which means we, on the one side, run research projects on topical issues around multi-level governance and federalism. But we also, and that is our do function, we also implement programs, country programs, particularly in post-conflict and fragile countries, where there is a political process that includes discussions around power sharing and inclusive governance. And in these programs, we provide technical assistance, capacity buildings, sometimes educational campaigns around these concepts, and particularly on the challenges, but also opportunities for including in strengthening or working on multi-level governance as a provision for addressing fundamental changes around inclusive governance. For example, we ran a 3-country program in Morocco, Tunisia, and Jordan until very recently, working intensively with women and women's rights organizations to help them understand the challenges and opportunities they have for political empowerment in context, in a country context, which is decentralized. And we still keep offices in Tunis and Amman. We also had a program in Iraq some time ago. Ethiopia is one of our focus countries as well. And we're currently, as an organization, in our work supported by 10 countries, which is Canada as the founder, Mexico, Brazil, Germany, Switzerland, Nigeria, Ethiopia, which I already mentioned, India, Pakistan, and Australia. Now, why did we become interested in Syria, which we're discussing today? Now, after the fall of the Assad regime, we were approached by people, experts in our broader network, specifically the diaspora, but also from people within the country, to provide an input to the political debate in Syria, exactly around those questions we're discussing today, on how to balance unity and diversity, and how to potentially inspire this debate through sharing international experiences. And in order to respond to these requests, we've firstly commissioned two papers, which form part of the report we're presenting today. The first paper, authored by Soeren, Keil, and Eva Salzberger, presents you with an in-depth mapping of the aspirations of different communities, groups, and compounds of Syria about what they see as their role in the future Syria, and in terms of building the country's future state structure and governance system. And in mapping out these aspirations, we've attempted to be as inclusive of views and voices in the country as this was possible. And the second part of the paper, authored by Leosides and our president and CEO, Rupak Chattopadhyay, is based on international experiences in contexts similar to, but of course different to Syria, with an attempt to provide some food for thought, some international analogies in terms of what could or maybe could not work in country in order to address, in Syria, in order to address the challenges the country faces in terms of building a stable and peaceful system of governance. So in that sense, this approach reflects very much our approach, which is to learn from each other and to share experiences, but not to present any solutions, because this is, of course, up to the people in Syria to discuss amongst themselves and develop and define their own solutions they deem fit for the situation they currently are facing. Now, without further ado, I would like to hand over the floor to the authors to present the key findings and suggestions they took from their report. So the first I mentioned was authored by Soeren Keil, who's professor at the University of Passau, and he's been in Syria many times. I'm happy for Soeren to add anything I'm missing in my brief introduction to him. And likewise, Eva Salzberger. She's founder and chair of the European Center for Kurdish Studies in Berlin, Germany. And I think that that description speaks for itself in the context of the subject we're discussing today. So Soeren and Eva will present the actor mapping, and this will be followed by a brief presentation of the international experiences that people in Syria may or may not find useful or helpful in their political deliberations, by Leosides, who's from the University of Warwick and who's specialized in conflict studies and power sharing arrangements and has been involved in many of these processes internationally. So I'll hand over the floor to, I think you, Soeren, you wanted to start, and we're very much looking forward for your presentation and subsequently for comments and feedback from our Syrian experts, and then later on from the audience. Thank you very much. Over to you, Soeren.
Thank you very much, Felix. Welcome everybody also in my name. Yes, Eva and I authored the first part of the report, namely the actor mapping. Now, we have agreed we do a sharing of the labor, so I will start, and then Eva will take over in the second part of the presentation. Let me start by saying, what did we try to do in our actor mapping? So our actor mapping, the aim really was to focus on multiple issues. We wanted to look at the political priorities of the main actors in post-Assad Syria. We wanted to assess the reality on the ground. So one of the findings is we found a big divergence between what they might state they want to do and what the situation is on the ground. And we wanted to specifically focus on questions related to inclusion, diversity management, and democratization. And the overall objective was to look at the different priorities and different perspectives and to develop a set of recommendations to see how can a process of transition that is inclusive and leads to a better future for Syria, how can that potentially be supported without, as Felix has pointed out, giving very concrete recommendations to say this and this or this and this should be done. Because like Felix, I strongly share the belief this needs to be decided by the Syrian people. In doing so, we spoke to over 30 people in Syria and abroad. We spoke to some experts who've been involved in Syria for a long period of time. We also conducted 2 focus groups with leading political elites. And this is very important, we also conducted field work in Syria. So it's not that we just did everything on Zoom or online, but we actually did quite a number of talks in Syria, speaking with people on the ground. What I would like to present is our main findings for the most important actor in Syria, that is HTS or the new government. The official HTS, as it existed until December 2024, when it took over power from the Assad regime, does not exist anymore. It was abolished with the peace conference, the National Peace Conference, and its military structures were integrated into the new security structures of Syria. But the political framework of HTS is still very much the framework that is used for governing Syria today. The leader of HTS, Ahmed al-Shara, is currently Syrian president, appointed in March 2025. And leading HTS figures have been in charge of developing the transitional process in the last 11 months since the end of the Assad regime. So when we look at HTS, there's a number of very interesting documents to look at. Of course, we looked at the National Dialogue Conference that took place in February. We looked very closely to the Constitutional Declaration that came out in March and April 2025. And we looked at what politically has happened in the last 11 months, including, of course, most recently, the indirect election for the Parliamentary Assembly in October 2025. So if we want to contextualize HTS, it is very important as a first step to say, rhetorically, HTS is committed to democracy and inclusion. This is mentioned in the speeches by President al-Shara. It is also in some of the strategic documents. There is a commitment to say they want to build a democratic Syria, they want to build an inclusive Syria. Though the word democracy is not mentioned in the Constitutional Declaration, that is a very obvious miss in the Constitution. But we find that in reality, the political system as we have it at the moment and as it was built by the Constitutional Declaration is very much centering power on the president. So the president is very dominant in the system. He appoints members to the parliament, a third of the members of the parliament. He also appoints the judges to the highest courts. He is the head of the military services. He appoints his cabinet. it is not quite clear in the constitutional declaration how the president is elected or how his power is controlled, and whether, for example, parliament can veto presidential decisions. So there is a strong focus on the president and presidential powers. While the constitutional declaration talks about a division of powers and the separation of powers, we don't see it because the system is so focused on the president. The president is a very important figure in the system. We are yet to see the judiciary and the parliament function properly. So we don't really see how executive, legislative, and judiciary play together. When it comes to the issue of inclusion, again, we see a rhetorical commitment, including mentioning it in the constitutional declaration. In fact, as some authors have highlighted, this is the first time that there really is a recognition that Syria is a diverse country beyond the dominant Arab identity group. But when we look at the practice of this diversity recognition, it becomes a bit more problematic. On the one side, we still see the commitment to Arabic as the only official language. So, for example, Kurdish is not recognized, the Syrian language is not recognized. We also still see the name Syrian Arabic Republic. Personally, I think this was an opportunity missed. It would have been very easy for the HDS, for the new elites to change the name and say we get rid of the Arabic because we are more diverse than that. And what we are seeing is that although we are seeing diversity in the cabinet, so for example, the Minister for Education is a Kurd, the Minister for Labor and Social Welfare is a Christian, is an Arab Christian woman. We see a member of the Alawites, we see a Druze in the cabinet. So we see diversity in the cabinet. But these people that represent the different groups, they are not affiliated with major parties within these groups. So the Kurdish education minister is neither backed by the PYD nor the Kurdish National Council, the two main party groups in the Kurdish areas. Nor does a Christian Arab woman have any major backing from a Christian political party supporting her. Now, she's very capable and she does a very good job. There's no question about that. But what we are seeing, and the argument we are making, is that individuals have been selected to represent their group, but they do not speak on behalf of the group. Instead, they are more a symbol. Oh, look, we've got a Christian or we've got a Kurd, rather than saying they represent the Kurdish group. Talking about the Kurdish group, this is where I will stop, and I will hand it over to Eva to speak about the other actors. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Soeren. If you have a look at the Kurds, we have at least to differentiate between two different factions. First of all, the PYD. As you all know, the PYD controls the autonomous administration of North and East Syria. And when it comes to democracy, we see on the one hand a rhetorical commitment to democracy very clearly on the side of the PYD. But if you have a more closer look, we see on the other hand that there have, for example, been no proper elections in the ANES in the last 10 years. If you have a look at the social contract, for example, the political system in ANES is based on councils. However, neither the way these councils are elected is transparent, nor are their competences clear, and they also have no financial power. So decisions are not really taken by these councils, but decisions are rather taken by a very small circle of elites within the PYD leadership. If it comes to inclusion, the second important aspect we had a look at, you again see a very strong rhetorical commitment to inclusion. And you also see some de facto inclusion, one has to say that, of Arabs and Syrians, for example. But as the system as such is not democratic, this kind of inclusion does not correspond to real power. So The pressure on specific group increased recently in the ANES regarding language and education rights. Some of you might have realized that private Syrian schools were closed and no alternative offered for Assyrians to learn their original language. We also saw another interesting move. We saw that the PYD tried to work closer to other components in Syria, for example, with the Alawites, the Assyrians and the Druze. We all know that there has been the Al-Hasaka conference where all these different groups came together in order to develop some ideas for a more inclusive and more democratic Syria. Another, maybe a last point, which is interesting to mention is, of course, regarding inclusion, the PYD is committed very much to gender equality. But if you have a closer look, again, you realize it's more a rhetorical commitment. For example, the SDF is very much male dominated, at least the SDF leadership. If you're talking about the Kurds, we cannot only have the focus on the PYD, but we also have to talk about the KNC, the Kurdish National Council. Again, we have a strong rhetoric towards decentralization and democracy, but very much like the PYD, they also lack internal democracy and are even worse at women representation. And we also have to say that while the PYD is strongly influenced by the PKK, the KNC is influenced by the KDP Iraq. So no major decisions are taken against the will of the KDP Iraq, and of course also not against the will of the PKK. One has to see what is going to happen now that the PKK has more or less dissolved in Turkey. A second very important group is, of course, the Alawites. Having a look at the Alawites, we also realized that they are divided internally. We have on the one side those supporting Assad and have been fighting openly against HTS and the new government last April in Latakia. But on the other side, we also have those opposed to the Assad regime and which have not been fighting against HTS, but are still very afraid or wary of these new rulers and are not sure in how far they can trust them. We only see a very slow process of political party formation. I always think that this is quite interesting because if you have a look at Kurdish political parties, I stopped counting them at a certain point, but I think we have over 50 different Kurdish political parties. Not all of them are important. Some of them are just like one-man or rather one-man parties, but we have more than 40 political parties on the Kurdish side. On the Alawite side, I think one party has been lately founded, but that's about it. So if it comes to the ideas of the Alawite community regarding the future of Syria, we see very clear demands towards religious and group recognition on the one hand, and we saw quite a strong support for decentralization. And most recently, we also see some support for joint proposals together with the Kurds, the Druze, and others for an inclusive process and decentralized governance. As I said before, we had the Hasaka conference where also some Alawite representatives participated in. Talking about the Druze, in December 2024, you know that the Druze welcomed the fall of the regime, however, without showing much support or much sympathy for HTS and for the now president. We see continued unrest in Sweda with a peak in July when several hundred, mainly civilians, were killed by militias which were related to the government. We see in terms of positions support towards inclusion and decentralization. The support of inclusion and decentralization is indeed growing. We also see some support for separation and even independence. However, it is very difficult to say how strong this support indeed is. Also case of the Druze, we have no established political parties yet, but we have kind of division between the support for certain religious sheikhs and personalities and military leaders. And it is so far unclear, I'd say, in how far the majority of Druze people is really represented by these leaders. And I think this is particularly true for women. Maybe a last point about the Druze, we see divided positions towards Israel. Some see Israel as the enemy, while others believe that without Israel's military intervention in July, the fights in July would have continued. So there is some, it seems that the positions towards Israel are somehow shifting at the moment. Yeah, maybe I only say a few more words to the Assyrians. The Assyrians as Christian group are very worried about HTS and a possible move towards political Islam. They show a lot of support for religious freedom and group recognition. We also have to realize that ADO, one of the most important representatives of the Assyrians, find it very hard to access the new Damascus government. And this is linked, of course, to the hesitation of the government to work with established political parties. It's not only the Assyrian parties which could not talk as parties to the new government, but it's also Kurdish political parties, with the exception of the PYD. When we have a look at Syrian civil society, this is the last group I'm going to focus on. We see that it is also very diverse. We have more conservative or Islamist NGOs which support the new government and are pushing for Islamic education and Arab Sunni dominance, for example. But we also have more Western-oriented liberal civil society that promotes democracy and inclusive governments, decentralization, and women's rights. And at the moment, I think one can say that they are really a very important and major actor, and they can work relatively freely inside Syria. This is one of the positive points to stress, I think. To conclude, our mapping finished in a way with a hope for a window of opportunity due to President al-Shara's willingness to discuss decentralization, which he mentioned in an interview in August 2025. However, we believe that this window has not really materialized, and we are seeing worrying developments for new tensions. We see violence in Aleppo, we see violence in Sueda and other parts of the country. We see the commitment by HTS to Arabic as the only official language, including in schools in Kurdish areas. We see the rewriting of history in favor of HTS, seeing al-Shara's speech at the UN, where he said that HTS defeated ISIS, and there could be additional points be mentioned. So currently, it is very hard to see any space for political negotiations and trust building and finding compromises, in particular, as there are more and more incompatible visions and policies emerging at the moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Soeren and Eva, for this very brief but concise overview of the mapping that you've done. And I think you, Eva, concluded with points that directly segue into Neo's presentations, because you mentioned the window of opportunity that you saw in moving things forward in the country in terms of inclusive governance that you see closed now. Neo, we are looking forward for your input on the question on, based on the experiences from other countries, what kind of ideas, thoughts do you have? Over to you.
Thank you very much, Felix, and also Julian, for both of your support in drafting this proposal. Indeed, it's a window of opportunity. It's one of these moments in every country's history where you get the chance to think of potential future scenarios, for the potential future solutions for the constitutional design and the constitutional setup of the country. Since Soeren and Eva have covered the domestic context, I'm not going to repeat some of the dimensions they have presented, but I will focus primarily on the international toolkit. I've got conflict resolution experts. We propose in general the default consensus in the UN system, in the international Western thinking as well, is that countries should remain united, but there should be some form of inclusivity along the spectrum of majorities and minorities across all communities, as most people talk about Syria. So what kind of institutions we could suggest, we can prescribe, not necessarily prescribing, that's probably not the correct term. Solutions that can inspire a debate is a much better formulation, inspiring a debate and also inspiring the language for that debate. I was very happy to see the translation here, translating the terms in a way that is accurate, but also in a way that is appealing to communities across Syria. It's very important. So if there is any issue with the translation, please feel free to interrupt me so I can elaborate further. So one of the first points for inspiration in our joint paper with RUPAC is that of segmental autonomy, group autonomy. So often there are issues that each group can uncover, they can resolve themselves because it doesn't affect other groups. So many of the constitutional experts suggest that communities in places such as Syria, given also the long history of the Ottoman and post-Ottoman Milad and post-Milad systems, allow for this group autonomy. This is something that is often the most easy to introduce in the public debate and negotiate. Looking at the next step is territorial forms of autonomy. This can take two forms. They can take a more formal constitutional way of thinking in the form of federalism, or they can be suggested in the form of decentralization that Eva has suggested. Given what is happening on the ground, one of the two is most likely to happen if we want to undo the current ambiguity of the status quo. Here, Rubak's work, particularly in Cyprus, when he introduced first the idea of smaller units, is particularly important. We had an event a few years back, and Rubak suggested to us, instead of looking at a two-zone federation, look at smaller units, even have those in a most decentralized form in municipalities. The idea here is that if you have not 3 or 4 major units, but you have 30, that would be much easier for the country to run, have local autonomy and have local accountability, but it also creates coordination problems when it comes to secession, because the big fear here of decentralization, the big argument against, is that if you allow for units to federalize, to have their own territorial concentration, territorial powers, that would lead to the next step of them seceding. But if those units are split into smaller ones, then the incentive that you might have at the level of a leader in one unit might not correspond to the same incentive for another leader in another unit. Therefore, it becomes much easier to have the dissolution of the, much more difficult to see the dissolution of the country, even at the rhetorical, at the level of attempting to do so. So here the question is not just decentralization or no decentralization, but also how to do it and what kind of safeguards you could have. Another safeguard mechanism that we have introduced in the discussion is that of backstop mechanism. The idea that you create some sort of safety mechanism for both, for all communities. The idea that you can have a tribunal, for instance, where if one of the two groups, one of the many groups, violates the agreement, they will be facing tangible consequences on their legal entitlement. So instead of saying no to decentralization, no to federation, you make it conditional on good behavior and implementing the agreement. This is particularly important when it comes to vulnerable groups, women, and also displaced individuals. All these will be tied to implementation through an implementation matrix. So providing the incentives for decentralization to all communities, but also holding both the center and the communities accountable to the implementation of the settlement. This is the key prescription here, if I could say. The third element of constitutional design when it comes to inclusivity relates to what happens to power in Damascus, to the center, to the capital, and whether there's going to be some form of formal power sharing, consociationalism, as Soeren has indicated earlier. One key feature of consociationalism is minority vetoes. The idea that majorities and minorities need to reach a consensus, and where minorities have a veto in the process. Here, given the sizes of the communities and given what I have suggested earlier in some other work on decentralization, it might be quite difficult to negotiate minority vetoes. So is there any other mechanism that we can bring into debate? And one of the ideas that we debate in the paper is that of having an inclusive cabinet using some form of formula like the ones we had in Northern Ireland, where all parties are automatically included in the cabinet on the basis of their electoral results. There are multiple mathematical formulas to do so. I don't need to go into details of those, but the idea is that every group has an insurance. The majority is guaranteed the majority of the seats in the parliament, the majority of the seats in the cabinet, while the minority is also insured. The minority has guaranteed participation if they have the right political support, if they have the democratic support. So it's linked to democracy. It's a democratic liberal form of consociationalism, and it's at the same time inclusive. And on the basis of that, one could also think and consider gender quotas, the various options that we explore, and we're more than happy to expand further on those in the discussion. So here, the bottom line in the paper is that we can engage with ideas that are often seen as high risk in terms of their performance, but also extremely beneficial, high benefit, high gain. Ideas where the risk can be mitigated through backstop mechanisms, safety mechanisms, often through strategic use of arbitration, having an external party. And here is where Syria could possibly have a very optimistic future, because everybody seems to be converging around the same allies who could play the role of both donors and arbitrate, if necessarily, among the groups on issues that are not necessarily of key importance, but are also important to be resolved, so they will not have any lingering ambiguities. So a full toolkit in terms of conflict resolution methods, I think, is essential for Syrian stakeholders. And what is important is also to replicate what Soeren has done in Syria with focus groups to see how local experts respond to some of these solutions, what kind of language we can use. Another idea and a future project that I'm currently working to submit, if there's any interest in partnering up with Syrian stakeholders, is to have dedicated study visits in many of the places where we have seen some of those inclusive solutions suggested or even introduced and implemented. We're currently working on a proposal to do something of Syrian interest in Belfast, in Northern Ireland, where there has been a system of inclusive governance for the last few decades, and also take that experience and run surveys in Syria itself, public opinion surveys, but also run them in the most engaging way, presenting short videos, simulations of what is happening elsewhere, animations of what other countries have done, and get Syrian respondents to express their own opinions on some of these issues. So with that, I'm more than happy to take any questions, and I look forward to listening the comments of our Syrian colleagues.
Thank you very much, Neil, and also for being very practical and making suggestions for further work. And as you said, we're very keen to hear from our audience what the thoughts are on this and anything else that has been said or has not been said. So with that, I hand over to Liam to MC the next round. Thank you. Over to you, Liam.
Thank you, Felix. Good morning, everybody from Ottawa in Canada. I think we've had some very interesting presentations so far in this discussion, but one of the things that has been highlighted as essential, of course, is that this is a decision that will be made by Syrians. The future of the state of Syria will be made by Syrians. And so, of course, as international experts and as international organizations, it is essential for us to understand how Syrians view this, how Syrian stakeholders view these issues, and to ensure that those voices inform our opinions on these very important discussions. And so we're very privileged to be joined by a panel of Syrian commentators at the webinar today. And we have a couple of questions that we would like to pose to them. But before we do that, I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves so we understand who they are and where they are coming from. So first I'd like to invite Hindrin to introduce herself. Hindrin, please.
My name is Hendrin Mohammed. I am the head of the Demos organization from the northeastern Syrian province. I want to talk about this transitional part in Syria. It requires a lot, of course, of effort, and we are striving to reach the ideal governance model in Syria after all the years that affected every family in Syria. There are no individual, no family that has not been affected. We're trying now to bring all the Syrians together. Perhaps after 14 years, not every Syrian can be similar in opinion to their sisters and brothers in terms of what form should the future of Syria say. There should be an end to all violence activities, all
there are so many different places. So we have first to end all these conflicts that are going on, all the violence. Too, that would have to have a civil type of police that would actually help to affect the peace between all parties. And we have to have good representation in a government that actually will affect the security on the borders, all the borders, Syrian borders. And we also need to look at all the camps that are in Syria right now. And so we have to also end this and get into the transitional justice, and we have to actually bring all those who were guilty of so many crimes to justice, and we have also to look at compensations to victims and their families, and also liberate all those who were in prison for political reasons. And we have to have the policies, the new policies that actually the civil society has to participate in new policies to govern all Syria. And so we will have a real dialogue, a Syrian dialogue, and with participation of women at least 30%, and we have all represented, whether they're in ethnic backgrounds, religious background, and denominations. And so the participation of women is very, very important, and that has to reflect all the diversity of Syria. And when we come to 1325, the declaration, this actually calls for the protection of women, and especially against violence, and their representation, and they need to actually benefit from this and the planning. And we have to actually bring women to the table and give them technical training and all sorts of training, so she can participate at the highest level. And right now we don't have a national plan according to 1325. So what we need to have a non-centralized or decentralized system, and we have to separation between powers, and also the separation of state from church. That's what we need right now, and that way we could have the representation from all parties that are found in Syria, and have that a effective transitional period. And we have to have a foundational parliament that will actually be able to protect the freedom and actually implement all these changes. So right now, since 2014, there were many areas that were actually governing themselves, and so I was one in those areas, living in one of those areas, and I was actually participating as a civil society representative in that area, and this happened in many areas. So of course, in the southern part of Syria, there were so many things that are special or connect to that part of the country. So many factors. So we have to actually bring all these factors that have to be political, social, and otherwise, and bring it to this decentralization idea. So and connected to all parts of the country. So the political decentralization, this is what we believe is the best system for Syria in the future.
Thank you very much, Hindrin, for those comments. I think that some of the issues that you raise, we will address in my next question to the panel, particularly the issue of cultural diversity of Syria. Hawass, would you like to please introduce yourself and give us your comments on what you think are some of the most important steps for Syria to move forward in this moment?
Good evening. I am Hawass Sadoum, and I am a former member of the negotiation, and also I represent the KNC, and Dr. Zohan, Dr. Eva had actually what they have said to their comments. I would like to also say a word about them when it comes to what Bashar al-Assad had, and Mr. Ahmed Shara is very similar. So we have one power, and that is the power of Mr. Al-Shara. So when it comes to the diversity of different political parties throughout Syria, so after after the declaration, there is right now a consensus for all Kurds and two parties, of course, when it comes to the Kurdish people, that they are supporting all what happened in the Conference of Kamishli in 2025. And this is, of course, thank you for your invitation. I would like to actually ask a question and maybe suggest some answers. Is Syria today a diversified country or not? There was a period of time, there was a denial of this diversity. Today, we have it's on the ground, it's a reality on the ground, and everybody knows it. So we have, of course, a lot of differences when it comes to opinions of the Syrian people. But today, in actuality, we have the Arab Sunnat, and we have the Alawis, the Druze, the Ismailiyin, the Kurdish Assyrians, others, Christians, Muslims. This diversity is there. We can't deny it. So how can we actually manage this diversity so I can get rid of all the negativity that actually was affected on the ground during the revolution and even before? This is what brought all this to the surface, how the Assad regime actually dealt with all this prior to the revolution. So right now, when it comes to the management, we have to admit that we have that Syria is a diversified country, and so I have been a representative in many of the opposition parties earlier or movements. I can't hear Mr. Hawass now. So right. So again, we need to clarify that point, that we have this diversity, and we have to actually dedicate a lot of time to look into the Kurdish issue, because it was targeted politically and on every other level, and even citizenship and being simply a citizen of Syria. So if we have several languages, then we have to also admit or recognize all these different languages. We have different religious parties or religions, then we have to also admit to that and recognize that. And we have so many different cultures. So there has to be enough space for those citizens to practice their differences. And of course, the Zoom, he did say about representation. Is that representation a good one, or is it just personal, or it is just for small, concise groups? Not so the Kurdish is Kurdish and the Christian is a Christian, and they are friends. But are they actually representing their societies or communities? No, unfortunately, no, they are not today, and this is what was going on during the last regime and Ba'ath regime, former regime, and it's going on today. So right now, when again we don't have that positive treatment of the issues. So we speak about decentralization or federalism, and we have to define it correctly. Federalism actually is the basis of the solution in Syria. And why? That is because that will assure to me that we will not have another dictatorial type government, and so killed millions of Syrians, and it was so all Syrians are in need of having a federal system which will actually defend against a dictatorial system or system of a dictator. So we are now going toward another dictatorial system. Unfortunately, that's what I see going on right now. So this is on those who were so if we have that kind of system, actually the Arab Sunnis are the ones who are going to suffer more if we have another dictator or some kind of dictatorship. So so I believe that we started with a project after European Center for Studies actually suggested this type of the federalism that would work for Syria, and there were so many projects that the Syrians actually started, and in particular Sunnite Arabs. So there were Canada, Spain, Switzerland, and others, actually went through some of this experience, the federalism, and they had some success with that. So when it comes to education and educational factor, we have to again admit and recognize all these languages, different languages, and actually promote this diversity. And right now we have so much hatred and so much division when it comes to the cultures and ethnic differences. So we have to get rid of that as soon as we can. And right now Syrians have a historical responsibility, and that is and the most important point is to discuss what kind of government or form of government we are going to have in the future for Syria. We have to agree on that. So democracy, of course, and that all parties will enjoy the rights, and that we will have also inclusivity when it comes to representation, and also distribution of wealth and power. But there is also a very important point that we cannot neglect, and but now, of course, what we have. Go ahead.
And then official representation to agree on the main aspect. Unfortunately, this government still is not playing that role, and they're taking the lead in all the negotiations. Now, talking about the federalism, it is important to pay attention to the current governance divisions that are apparent right now in Syria. Are we paying attention to the natural divisions that are occurring as a result of economic or cultural backgrounds? For me, my family currently now is divided between 3 countries: Syria, Turkey, and Iraq. As a result of the Ankara Agreement, some of those pieces are now in the lands returned to Syria. During the Ottoman rule, there has been some request for autonomy and some form of federalism. After the formation of the Syrian Republic, there has been some discussions regarding the formation of the Druze community, the Alawite community, and so on that existed back then. Personally, I do not agree with a lot of the military terminology. For example, referring to north of Syria, northeast of Syria, these are all military terminologies. There needs to be a reevaluation and a representation of the of the cultural backgrounds of the people who live in those areas. Again,
I think
when we're
I'm
talking
sorry
about the
to
divisions.
interrupt, Mr. Sadoun. I think that you've made some absolutely excellent points, and I think we will come back to that. But I'm just a little conscious of time, and that we have other speakers who would need to give their views. So thank you for those comments so far. Hold those thoughts. We will certainly come back to that. But now I'd like to ask Lujane, please, to introduce yourself and give us your views on what you think are the most important steps for Syria to take things forward. Thank you.
First of all, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. We are discussing very important issues as we are witnessing the transition of Syria into a new future form. I want to start with the hope that we need to acknowledge 4,000 of Jersey individuals that were martyred in Sweden recently. 350 women were raped and killed brutally, and they were also tortured brutally. They were also brutally treated after they were even killed, and we have seen some horrific scenes documented. Now we are talking about 4 days of horrific crimes committed. And now we are moving forward to talk about bringing Syrians together. In my opinion, currently we do not have a government. In order to bring people together, you need a government. At this moment, we are not officially having a government. Since the independence in 1947, Syria was converted into a farm. Several groups of militias, whomever had the arms, were imposing their rule in this area. During the rule of the Assad regime, this has been the case. Oppression on all levels, political, cultural, economical. Today, we are striving to build an independent and diverse country after 80 years of this oppression. How do we bring all of these governance together? We're talking about judicial governance, political, economic. I'm also talking about the need to form the new constitution and independence of the judicial sector. And then after that, the executive branch could come and guarantee the implementation of this independent and fair constitution. Right now, the Ministry of Defense is an ideological institution, an extremist institution. There is no fairness, no independence. So now anybody who is a Sunni, a Muslim, who refuses the status quo is oppressed, is marginalized. So we are talking back about the formation of an independent judiciary branch and executive branch. As Syrians, we are a collection of groups of ethnical formations. And now we are looking into forming a new modern government. Of course, we are looking at the examples of the United States, Australia, and so on. If we're talking about a federal system, for us in Sweden, after the massacres, we're having a strong opinion since the Jolani regime has killed more in Sweden than Al-Assad regime has killed in all the past decades. So we're not able to cooperate with this current group in power as the blood has not dried yet. Every day we're still using individuals from our community as they go to Damascus from Sweden, as they travel. There are a lot of attacks. They are still happening every day. There are no doubt that federalism is the solution. Most of the individuals in our community in the Sweden, they support that direction. So in the past 60 years during the Assad regime, we are ignorant. We became ignorant in the political issues. Initially, that, yes, federalism is the solution, but then we, of course, discovered that without a proper governance and a fair governance, it would not be beneficial, or it would not protect our rights. We're talking about the rights of our religious freedoms. We are not Muslims. We are the Druze, the unifiers. It's a separate religious movement, and we want to be guaranteed the right to live and observe our traditions. Another point, we want to guarantee that we want to implement our religious forms in terms of our daily life. For example, a Muslim male can marry more than one Muslim female. In terms of the Druze community, that is different. That is not allowed. We want to follow the regulations that are strictly respectful of our tradition and our religious. If there were no proper governance alongside the federalism system, we will lose those rights. Whether we're talking about any minority groups, the Kurds, the Druze, or any other group currently living in Syria, they should have the right to elect representatives that would represent them and protect their rights. We can't accept anybody who will represent us who is not understanding or respecting to our core, to our traditions. Why? Because if they are electing, if our groups, of our people are electing somebody to represent them, they will feel the responsibility to play a role in the success of this government, and therefore success of our country as a whole. We want to combat all the malicious representations and corruption in the government. people in Soweto that are not Muslim? Why do we need to, for example, allocate funds to build more mosques in our communities? Why don't we divert these funds, for example, to build libraries or provide clean water facilities, educational centers? The community in Soweto is striving to prosper, to provide more opportunities to its youth and growing generations. For example, also.
Excuse me, Lodian, I'm sorry to interrupt. I think I'm just very conscious of time. And I think you made a very excellent point there that we can just pause on, which is this idea of there need to be investment in the government system from the communities in Syria. We will come back to these issues shortly, but we have one of our experts has to leave very shortly, and we have some excellent questions in the chat, one of which is directed specifically at Soeren. So I'd like to just pose that question to Soeren, and then we'll come back to our Syrian guests who have provided some very, very fascinating reflections to ask them about something more about the kind of how we might turn the rhetoric into more of a constitutional political architecture that can work. So Soeren, I'm not sure if you've seen the question directed to you in the Q&A box, but someone has asked that you mentioned missed opportunities. Do you feel that these were deliberate, or do you think that the immense challenges and many parallel processes, some aspects are missed or that could be taken up later?
Thank you, Liam. It's a good question. I think it's probably a mixture of both. I think some of the opportunities were missed on purpose. It seems to me overall that the assessment is that right now, in conflict studies, we talk about the ripeness of a conflict, but it's ready to come to a negotiated settlement, right? Where neither side believes they can win militarily, or winning militarily would be too costly. And it seems to me that in Syria, we are not there yet. And in the summer, there was a period where it felt, especially after the events that were mentioned in Soweto, it felt like we might have reached the ripeness point, and now we will see negotiations. President al-Shara gave an interview where he talked about the possibility of discussing decentralization. And there seemed to be a window of opportunity for inclusive governance. Unfortunately, that has not materialized in recent months. We have not seen a follow-up on this. We've not seen any further discussions. And I think the situation today leaves us with a lot of questions which are still unanswered and which seem to be vital for Syria's transition. So these include questions over when will democratic elections take place, including elections for the president, right? He's not democratically elected in elections. He's legitimized by his faction winning the war, right? What will the process towards a new constitution look like? We do not know that. We do not have a clear idea about that. Somehow parliament is meant to be involved in this, but how exactly it will work, how, for example, more diversity will be represented in the constitution-making process, that is still very much unclear. To what extent will HTS be able to balance its previous Islamist ideology with a commitment to democracy and human rights, right? It seems to me this is still a quite important question that needs further elaboration. And I think it's a challenge for the HTS leadership as well. I'm not denying that. Like, HTS is not a uniform organization. I think within the leadership there's quite different factions with different priorities. I think the question overall that we are discussing here, how diversity management and inclusion will actually look like, I think that's still very much open, and one can only hope that some of the things we've heard from Hindrin and Luchain on the use of force and the use of violence, that we move away from that and move to a politically negotiated settlement.
Thank you very much, Soeren, for those reflections on that question. And thank you everyone who has put questions in the chat. We have a number of excellent ones. I hope we will have some time to get to them. But I'd like to return now to our Syrian guests. And I think one of the things that has come clear through their comments first is that, as discussed, there is a need for substantive representation, substantive buy-in, investment, feeling of value from the government. And the current constitutional declaration in Syria does specifically acknowledge the cultural diversity of the country. And I think our speakers started to speak a little bit about this in their previous comments. But the question here is, how can this specifically be addressed in a constitutional and political framework that would work for the people of Syria? So I'd like to pose that question. How do we move from recognizing diversity to making it work in a political and constitutional framework that would meet the needs of the Syrian people? So I'd like to pose that question first to Hindrin, and I'd ask kindly if you could keep your comments fairly concise in response to this question, because I would like to try and get some questions from the audience. So thank you. Hindrin, the floor is yours.
So the question is to everyone or just particular person?
So the question will be to yourself, Hawass and Lujain, but I'd like you to go first in trying to answer. Thank you.
Honestly, when we spoke about decentralization and as a solution for Syria, when we speak about the law or 107, which was actually in 2000, established in 2011 under Assad regime. So this was, we need to give it to the Syrians, make it attractive to them. So this is, we have to package it in a way that is accepted by the Syrians, not like as indication of dividing Syria into different parts, but so they understand it. So I was expecting that in a report that would be more about the countries that actually experience similar situations, or more countries. We don't want to divide Syria. I don't think any Syrian actually citizen would like to see a divided Syria. What we want to clarify that this will be for them to actually enjoy the rights that they deserve. So our opinion, again, without actually mixing ethnic or religious factors into it, and the languages. My colleagues refer to that, but we have different identities, Syrian identities. We have to bring all under one constitution. So when it comes to March 10th, and when we speak about the Kurdish issue would not be solved by, having delegations or groups of this discussion group. We have others, the Assyrians, the Druze, but when it comes to the Kurdish and it's like throughout the whole Middle East, and we have to address it in a right way. And it's so when it comes to the global community or world community and what they can do, they have to help with issue of women and have women lead in this these suggesting the new solutions for a new Syria. So there are so many different issues that has to be addressed by the constitution. Even the flag, of course, that was the flag even was also selected by revolutionaries. So we need to look at that as well and have the will of the Syrian people discuss, what type or what form the flag should be, just as an example. and so also the national anthem and others, and even a currency, Syrian currency. So I don't want to take more of time from my colleagues. Go ahead and take your time.
Thank you very much, Hindran. Hawass, would you like to address that question next, please?
And we are not, we don't have too many differences when it comes to Syrians, especially inside this, coalition or forum. But the question, how can we arrive to this type of constitution, and especially under the current situation, under the current government? So now we have many national or international players in Syria, which helps. But when it comes to the internal situation, we feel like the new government, all what they do is they want to appease the international community. So when we'll go to the first question, the opportunities that we had, the Syrians are now in front of a concrete opportunity that would have to build that real and inclusive Syrian community, and that would bring everyone. We have, of course, for the Kurds, we have, of course, different parties that actually within the Kurdish community representing different denominations or different religions and ethnic convictions. So we can actually come together, all of us, to agree to fundamental issues and then build that way. But before that, we have to agree. I have to have agreement among all the different parties in Syria. And I'm convinced about that. Of course, 2245 is the international community decision. 2245, they are still speaking about that. And so to translate that on the ground, 2254, we have to have a national conference, and we'll have to have a council that will actually institute all the different study groups or different delegations that would actually create the safety net or safe space to discuss all these matters. But if we leave that, and I'm not very optimistic about that, if we leave it to the current parliament, and a parliament that is actually preparing this constitution, I'm afraid that they will not succeed. I can't hear the speaker now.
Thank you very much, Hawass, for that response. Lujane, would you like to address this question of how the constitutional and political framework may develop to meet the needs of Syrians?
When it comes to the constitution, before we write a constitution, we have to have fundamentals and principles. One, we have to have public freedoms. We cannot mess with it. And then, of course, constitution. The constitution, it has to be first. So, one, and it goes secular. It will be a secular government and the freedoms. These are 2 points that's how will lead us to the right constitution in the country. So when it comes to the constitution, has to be democratic, has to not come from any religion, like based on any religion, whether it is the Islam or Christianity or other religions. So here is a contradiction. So the state should not have a religious identity. So it has to be independent religiously. So the constitution cannot speak about or address any religious principles, and has to have or guaranteed equality for all people, no matter where they are from in a country. The dog was actually making some noise. I'm sorry, but has to be full respect for all different factions in Syria, and also when it comes to gender, and there will be also the differentiation between male and female. So in the past, the president has to be a man, a male, and Muslim. That was in the constitution in the past, and also there has to be, of course, from 1948 declaration and all the other agreements based on that. We have to actually bring the thoughts from these different conventions since 1948. And so right now we don't have mechanism to actually legislate in that way. So let's assume that we wrote that constitution in Syria, and all the rights are there reserved. But what about the implementation? So now when we speak about Suwaida and what happened, and atrocious acts that were committed there. So here we had a people in general, all people in Syria, everyone getting accustomed to violence and solving problems or issues with violence. So we have 300,000 in that city, and they went and slaughtered people in that way. So will these people actually see ahead, and actually to implement that constitution that was written in the right way, and it's good. So again, implementation, we don't have mechanism. The army and the police, or internal police, they are extreme, or have extreme religious thoughts, we have right now. So how can we get some help? As my friend said, 2254 and declaration that actually speak about a transitional period, and it should be a transitional period. It cannot be prolonged, and so it's actually right now what we have is a government that is very similar to what we had before during Assad when it comes to that point. So we need water, we need electricity, internet, fuel, food, products. So we have many other buildings that are actually occupied by religious extreme factions, nevertheless, even today. So right now we are dealing with Jordan, for instance, for help.
Unfortunately, now it became dangerous on the minority of Druze in terms of pathways. That's why we are looking into opening the Dawood pathway with Israel. What about the investigation in the killing of the 4,000 individuals who were killed from the Druze? Their group graves, and we need to find out who was affected. We need to open a proper line of investigation to deal with this tragedy. We also demand peace. We are expecting another attack, another violation of our rights, of our lives, any day. So we want guarantee of peace and protection between us and between those in power right now.
Thank you very much, Lajane, for those thoughts and perspectives. We are currently over time on our webinar, but I do just want to very briefly address two questions that we had in the chat. If our guests would be so kind as to give us a little more time. And I'm going to paraphrase them. And I think there are two sides of a very interesting coin. The first is a question about effectively how to balance unity and diversity in Syria, the need to develop a common identity while recognizing the diversity and the distinct identities of the different constituent peoples of Syria. So I think I'd like to pose the question to our experts on our panel, how they think this can be achieved in this challenging context. And the second is a question about incentives. This was something that Neo mentioned in his presentation, and particularly incentives for decentralization. What would be the incentives for decentralization in the Syrian context? Eva, you mentioned that there had been some conversations about this, but perhaps some of the momentum was lost historically. So I'd like to ask two questions. The first is about how Syrians could balance this challenging need for unity with diversity, and what views are on that. And secondly, what would be the incentives for a decentralization process for the various actors in the country? I will open the floor if you'd like to raise your hand, if you have a response to this.
Neo, please go ahead.
Neo, would you like to
I couldn't find the button, so I was looking for the button. So very quickly, the solutions of decentralization and federalism are ideal for settings where citizens feel they have a lot in common, like the Syrian citizens. There's a joint history, joint traditions, joint culture, but at the same time, they also think they differ in significant dimensions. So federalism could allow the flexibility to adjust according to these identities that are fluctuating and they're multidimensional. People could feel at the same time Syrians, but they feel they belong to a particular ethnic or religious group. In terms of the incentives, the international community could provide technical support, but beyond what is the technical knowledge and wishful thinking, the international community could support Syria with aid, significant aid. That's an important incentive, as well as strong guarantees at the international level, security level, that Syria's unity will be supported by the international community. So yes, Syria should proceed with decentralization, but at the same time, the international community should be there to support it. So these are two significant incentives: international status of Syria as well as foreign aid. And in addition to that, one could think of disincentives for sides who violate the agreement. So the side who breaks significant aspects of the agreement should also be disincentivized.
Thank you, Neo. Would anybody else like to make any comments in response to those questions?
Yes, the issue of balancing between the diversity and unity and federalism, I think the answer is simple. We need to protect diversity and mutual agreement. I don't think there are any voices right now that are going against that. It is essential to acknowledge the diversity in terms of culture, education, to give this feeling of safety and acknowledgement of this diversity. We are respectful of freedoms. We need to respect the dignity of these groups and their diversity. In my ID, it says Arab Syrian, but in fact, I am a Kurd. So I want an identity that represents me in all formal government institutions. Since the formation of the Syrian government, we are forming a unified heritage aside from all the marginalization and the oppression that some groups faced. But we need to acknowledge that we do have this shared heritage and acknowledge the diversity. And it's one of the aspects of building the new government from the bottom up and not the other way around. And this way we can guarantee the balance among the needs of acknowledgement in the diversity of all the minorities and various groups that form Syria.
Thank you, Hawass. Are there any more comments before we wrap up the webinar?
There was one, I think, important question being posted in the last 2 minutes. That is about the challenges of federalization or decentralization, in the sense that it would empower authoritarianism, potentially at the local or at the subnational level. And as an example, it is referred to Kurdistan in Iraq. And I'm just quoting here the last sentence, where the KDP and the PUK have used federal autonomy to build party fiefdoms rather than democratic institutions. So I'm just putting this on the floor and wonder whether anyone would like to respond, again with a request to be very brief as we're run over time. Yes, Hindran, over to you. Hindran, do you want to take the floor? Or
if you could just repeat the question, was not heard properly by all participants. Summarize, please.
Sure. The question is, what is the risk that decentralization or federalization institutionalizes authoritarian rule at the local level? And as a reference, it was referred to Kurdistan in Iraq, where, and here I quote, KDP and PUK have used federal autonomy to build party fiefdoms rather than democratic institutions. Neil, do you want to respond to the question?
This is an absolutely excellent question by Gulai. This is indeed the fear. Federalism and decentralization come with risks. However, those risks are manageable. And the way they are manageable is by looking at the international experience of how we could implement future constitutional transitions and peace agreements. Specifically, what we suggest in the paper is to have a matrix, an implementation matrix, or an implementation mechanism where we measure the degree that each of those units, in the case of Syria, one possible suggestion is not to have the same model as Iraq, where you have one Kurdish unit but have multiple. So each of those units will have to implement commitments. What does it mean if they don't implement their own commitments, and if we have the scenario that Gulai has suggested? That will mean that part or the whole of their legal entitlements to the agreement could be challenged. And the mechanism that this could be challenged is through a neutral arbitration court. So we're suggesting here the possibility of having both implementation mechanism and an enforcement mechanism through a judicial or other process. This doesn't eliminate the risk completely, but from the point of view of potential implementers or sides in the conflict, they will have to be faced with the dilemma of either pushing the maximum of their demands and establishing, as Gulai has suggested, an authoritarian mini-regime, which might happen anyway if you don't implement a settlement. That's another concern. So it's a matter of alternatives here. But if they follow the route of a negotiated agreement, the incentives will be there to have a recognized autonomy, internationally recognized and nationally recognized autonomy, but that will be subject to them implementing their commitments. So the authoritarian system would require a replacement with democratic elections domestically in those units, as well as implementation of the right of return for the displaced, which is a major priority for the international community and the Syrians, of course, themselves, as well as human rights and gender equality. That would be the four elements where we can think of a matrix. We can add and negotiate other elements as well. So in a nutshell, Gulay, the negotiated settlement presents a pathway away from establishing those authoritarian subunits, while the insistence to the status quo, and if we do nothing right now and we let the status quo continues, will cement those authoritarian tendencies in either part of Syria.
Thank you very much, Neil. I think we'll have to close the webinar now as we ran over time. Thank you very much for all your contributions. I don't know whether Rupak, you would want to say, or Hindran, last words from you. You had your hand up. Or you're fine? Okay, fine. So we'll close this this webinar now. Apologize for slight technical challenges in between, but I would like to thank everyone who contributed and who asked very important questions, but first and foremost also our guests from Syria to take the time and share their insights and experiences. I think it was for us very important to hear those voices, and we'll reflect on the comments that you made, and we hope when we can take the work forward that we've started now in collaboration with the objective to support your endeavors and to make a small contribution to finding, for you to find solutions that work for the country as a whole. So thank you very much. And also to our interpreters, for who it is always a challenge to translate very difficult concepts simultaneously. And hope to see you all again. Thank you very much and have a great day.